I was thinking this week about when my wife and I were engaged, and I'll just say this: engagement is miserable. It is. It's a necessary evil. It really is. And if you get engaged, make it as short as possible. If you're engaged longer than 6 months, you're doing it wrong. All right, that's just my personal opinion. But there is one glimmer of hope for engagement, and it's this: you get to register for gifts. It's just this weird phenomenon. It's the only time in life where you will basically get to tell your friends and family what they have to buy you because you chose to get married. So it's like, you must get me this. Go buy it. And it's great. It's a beautiful thing. When my wife and I got engaged, I kind of left all the registering to my wife. I just figured whatever you want is what I want, baby. That's what I figured I needed to do. But there was one thing that I really wanted. There was only one thing that I wanted to register for, and it's this right over here. It's a bread machine. For some reason, I deeply wanted a bread machine. And to be honest with you, the reason that I wanted a bread machine is because the founding director of Breakaway, Greg Mott, got up on stage and talked about the bread machine that he got when he was engaged. And I was like, I want that, And so I just figured I'm registering for that too. And I just love the idea of being able to make my own bread. It just sounded cool to think like about having people over and be like, hey bro, I got a loaf of cinnamon swirl rising right now. Can I get you some in a little bit? How cool does that make me? That's incredible. Now, I can count on two hands the number of times that I've actually made bread in 11 years. But let's be clear, I can make my own bread if I want to. Now, what you need to know about a bread machine is that if you are going to make bread, you have to get the ingredients just right. You do. You have to get the ingredients just right. And if you get the ingredients just right, you're going to get something that looks a little bit like this. This is a loaf that just came out of this guy earlier today. I mean, just look at this. I mean, I saw it. I had my assistant make it, so that might determine whether you ever want to come work for Breakaway or not. Like, it was like, I need you to make me some bread. Thank you very much, in the name of Jesus. But anyway, so this came out of this guy today, and man, it just smells. I love bread. That's why Jimmy John's offers free smells. And that's the reason we go to Texas Roadhouse, is because of the cinnamon honey butter that you put on the rolls. Now, if you are gluten intolerant, I lost you a long time ago, and I apologize for that. But that's really your fault. I love bread. And man, when you get the ingredients just right, you know what it does, man? It fills your house with the right smells, and when you add some of that cinnamon honey butter, man, it makes you make audible noises, which is awkward, and man, it makes your day. I love good bread, but here's what you need to know. If you don't get the ingredients just right, like let's say that you decide that you want to just get a little creative. And so maybe you want to throw in some Doritos and some Sour Patch Kids and some Reese's Peanut Butter Cups and some Dr. Pepper. Now, let me just be clear. All of these things on their own are very good things, all right? This thing offers 23 flavors. I love tasting every single one of them. There's no better combination than chocolate and peanut butter. But when you try and make bread with these things, what you get is this janky, jacked up, messed up ball of waste is what you get. And no, I'm not going to try it. You can come try it. Here's why I tell you this. The reason I tell you this is because tonight we are starting a 4-week series that we are calling Do Something Big. And one thing I know about you and your generation is that you long to do something big. One source did a survey and they found in 2014 that 72% of high school students wanted to start their own company at some point. 40% of those students in 2014 identified with this statement: I will invent something that changes the world. Now, I want you to think about what you were doing in 2014. Where were you? You were most likely in high school. So this survey in some ways represents you. What it tells me is that you from a young age have longed to do something big. You want to know that you have left your mark on this world. You want to be able to look out and see impact, that your life has counted for something. And that's why I love being with you here every Tuesday night. That is why I love college students, because something in you desires to change the world. And with the power of Jesus Christ, you just might do it. And I love that. But what I need you to understand is that your life can be a lot like baking bread. Man, if you have the right ingredients for impact at play in your life, then man, the smell and taste of your life and your contribution to society and your leadership can be a huge blessing. But man, if you don't have the right ingredients for impact at play in your life, you know what your life turns into? It turns into just a big waste of an opportunity. So what I want to do over the next 4 weeks is I want to flood your life with key ingredients for impact. If you want to do something big, then I highly encourage you to take notes and make sure that these ingredients are active and at play in your life. And the way that we're going to go about getting these ingredients is that each week we're going to look at a different significant figure in the Old Testament. Tonight, we're going to start with one of my favorites. We're going to start with a man named David. And we're going to look at David's life, and David is going to give us 4 key ingredients for impact. And the other thing I'm going to do each week is I'm going to give you kind of an overarching principle that these key ingredients fall under. So for tonight, kind of the overarching principle that I want you constantly thinking about is this: small over big. Small over big. I understand that you desire to do something big, but at this point in your life, I'm much more concerned about you being faithful in the small things so that you will one day be faithful in the big things that God gives you. So we're going to focus on small over big, and I'm going to give you 4 key ingredients from the life of David that are going to fit under this umbrella of small over big. So man, if you want to do something big, if you want your life to count, then I want to invite you to join me tonight in 1 Samuel chapter 13. 1 Samuel chapter 13. Many of you are familiar with David. If you're not, David did something big. Man, he dropped a giant with a sling and a rock. Man, he did something big, but that's not all he did. He actually became the second king ever of the nation of Israel. And not just that, he actually is a part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And his role in the lineage of Jesus is so significant that he's referred to, or Jesus the Messiah is referred to as the Son of David. So David did something big. And I think we can backtrack it to the early years of his life, and we can pinpoint 4 key ingredients that were at play in his life that I believe led to him doing something big. The first key ingredient that was at play in David's life was surrender. That's the first key ingredient present in his life, and I hope it will be present in your life: surrender. Listen to what we read about David in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14. This is right after the first ever king of Israel just makes bad choices. He's a mediocre king. So God comes to a guy named Saul, who's king, and tells him this. He says, "But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Did you see that? This is the first thing that we ever find out about David, that he is a man after God's own heart. Before we even know David's name, this is what we know about him, that he is a man after God's own heart. I think a good question to ask and answer is, what does that even mean? What does that mean to be a man after God's own heart? Well, fortunately, Acts chapter 13, verse 22 fills us in. It says this, talking about Saul and then David. And when he, that Saul, God had removed him, Saul, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart. Here's what it means, who will do all of my will. What does it mean to be a man after God's own heart? What does it mean that David was this? It meant that David wanted to do whatever God wanted him to do. There was a yes in David's heart to all of God's plans for his life, even before he knew them. And just to be clear, there wasn't just a yes in David's heart to the things that would make him famous or to the things that would get him more followers on social media or the things that would get him wealth or put him on a 30 under 30 impact and influence list. No, there was a yes in his heart to shepherding sheep even after he had been anointed as king. There was a yes in his heart. There was a yes in his heart to playing music for King Saul, even though King Saul wanted to kill him. There was a yes in his heart to sleeping in caves and living on the run while the current king tried to put him to death. David was surrendered to all God wanted for his life. You want to do something big, then please don't miss what I'm about to say. If you want to do something big, then get really good at saying yes to Jesus Christ. That's called surrender. Get really good at saying yes to Jesus Christ. Here's what you need to realize. Small yeses, small daily yeses to Jesus prepare you for the big trajectory shaping yeses to Jesus. I'll say that one more time. Small daily yeses to Jesus prepare you for the trajectory shaping yeses to Jesus. Let me explain it in this way. Right here on stage tonight, I have a $100 bill. And I want you to just imagine that this is your life right now. And you want your life to count. And so something in you might be saying, God, I want to do something big. I'm ready to say yes, and so let's go for it. Tell me what you want me to do. God, I'm ready to die for you. I'm ready to take your gospel to the unreached people groups. Send me overseas if it means dropping out of school right now. God, I'm ready to go. Or God, I want to speak at Breakaway. I think I'm ready for that. Go ahead and put me on that stage. That sounds good. Or God, I want to be a worship leader, and so God, put me on this circuit where I can travel around and stand on a stage and lead people. Or God, I'm ready to lead that organization as a freshman or a sophomore. Put me in that position. God, give me an influential job. I want to make a lot of money so I can give a lot of money. God, I am ready now. Show me what your plan is. I'm ready to do something big, and I'm ready to say yes. Here's what I want you to picture. What if God takes your $100 bill, your one yes, and instead he gives you $100 in quarters? Imagine if God took your $100 bill and he exchanges it for $100 worth of quarters. Because at this point in your life, he's not interested in one big yes of surrender. What he longs for is several small daily yeses to his plan. Like, hey, will you share Jesus with that person in your class that doesn't know me? Like, are you willing to reflect me in your dating relationship? Will you be a man or woman of purity? Will you commit to doing that? Will you treasure my word? Will you invest in the Shalom Project now? Here's what happens as we begin to say yes to these small opportunities, to these small requests from God. When we say, yes, I will share the gospel with that person. Yes, I will engage with that person. Yes, I'll give that person an invite to Breakaway. If you want me to do it, I don't care if he says no or not. Sure, I'll invite him. Yes, I'll commit to walking in purity, to honor you. Yes, if you want me to invest in the Shalom Project this year, I'm happy to do it. Yes, I will treasure your word. When we say yes in the small things, you know what it does? It prepares us to say yes to the trajectory shaping things later in our lives. Yes, God, you want me to move my family overseas to take the gospel to people who have never heard it? I will. God, I'm in. God, if you want to give me a lot of money, but then you don't want me to really touch it, you want me to give more than I make, I'm ready to do that. The answer is yes. You don't want me to just give money to help someone adopt, but that you want my wife and I to invite 1, 2, 3 orphans into our home. The answer is yes. And you know what happens? Those small yeses prepare you for the bigger yeses, and you're able to look at your life and you're able to see that it counts. Cultivate a life of surrender. Get really good at saying yes to Jesus Christ. Now, maybe you're sitting here and you're like, man, this idea of surrender to Jesus is really off my radar right now. That's not where you're at in life right now. This whole idea of being a man or woman after God's heart, that's not your thing. You're more of a man or woman after a job, or a man or woman after success, or man or woman after money, or you're a man or woman after pleasure, any type of pleasure in your life. If that's you, I just need you to know you have to do business with what Colossians 1:16 tells you. It tells you this. It says, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. If this is true, you have been created for him. What that means is God doesn't exist for you, you exist for God. God doesn't exist to bless your plans, you exist to fulfill his plans. And I have to believe that if this verse is true, then there are oceans of regret waiting for those who get to the end of their lives and realize that they gave their lives to the wrong things. The first ingredient for impact is surrender. The second key ingredient for impact is preparation. Flip over in 1 Samuel to chapter 17. Verse 31 puts us right in the midst of the battle, the famous battle between David and Goliath. And so David runs up on the scene and he realizes what is going on. And here's what it says. And this is the interaction that he has with King Saul, who's freaked out at this point. David says this. It says, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you're but a youth. And he's been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and I struck him and delivered him out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go. And the Lord be with you. The second key ingredient that was in David's life was preparation. See, David spent a considerable amount of time pasturing sheep in the field, and you know what it did? It prepared him to do something big. When he shows up and there's this giant taunting the nation of Israel, David steps in and says, I've been prepared, I've been equipped, I've been shepherding sheep for a long period of time, which means I have had to protect them. I've gone up against lions and bears, and I have dropped every one of them. I've had preparation. I've had time in the field. No one was watching me. No one knows my name. No one's singing my praises as a shepherd. But those times in the field have prepared me to do something big. And it wasn't just the battle with David and Goliath. David later became the second king of Israel. And what you need to know is in the ancient Near East, kings were often referred to as shepherds. So all the time David spent in the field caring for and leading sheep prepared him to care for and lead the people of Israel. What you need to see about David's life is the field came before the fame. The field came before the fame. What we want to do is we want to pass right by the field. Why? Because the field isn't sexy and it's small. But what the field did for David was that it prepared him for a faithful future. That's why in this season you value small over big. Do not resent your time in the field. I mean, all you have to do, and I'm not picking on anyone, but all you have to do is look at celebrities, some celebrities out there, even people on the Disney Channel, and it's just like their lives fall apart because no one put them in the field. It's like someone just came along and it was like, oh my gosh, they're good looking. And so, you know what? Let's get some Reese's and we'll throw it in there. And you know what? We'll just pour some Sour Patch Kids in there. And you know what? This Dr. Pepper, you know what? We'll just mix that all together and we'll put that out to society because they really have something going on. And what happens? You see these celebrities who from a young age were thrown into the spotlight. And the spotlight suffocates their lives. And it leads to all sorts of problems. Why? Because there was no period of time spent in the field cultivating their character. Do not resent the field, the time in the field of your life. Let me just tell you this. You want to maximize the time in your field right now? Before your name is ever known, before you ever experience any type of fame, before you're ever given a microphone, before you're ever given a lofty job title or a big paycheck, you want to maximize this time of preparation. Then I want to encourage you to do a few things. Number one, be teachable. Be teachable. You want to be a strong leader? Then don't miss what I'm about to say. Good leadership is learned from being around good leadership. Surround yourself with good leaders. You know what I do? When I'm meeting with someone that I know is a good leader, you know what I do? I take a notepad and a pen, and I show up with questions ready to ask them because I want their answers. I don't buy into small talk with people whose time is valuable. I show up and I'm ready to learn. I want to learn from them. I loved it. I had lunch with one of you guys this Friday, and I loved what happened at the lunch because we sat down and I was trying to push small talk, and he said, you know what, let me tell you why I'm here. He shut the small talk down, and I loved it because he was like, no, I'm here to learn. Let me ask you something. Good leadership is learned from being around good leadership. Get around good leaders. Ask pastors to go to lunch. Ask leaders in the community who are successful in their fields. Take them to lunch. Get with some of your professors. Buy them a meal. Come with questions and learn. Be teachable. Leaders are readers. Spend time learning. Be teachable. The second thing, if you want to maximize your time in the field, maximize your season of preparation, then stay humble. Take any opportunity that comes your way. If you think that something is beneath you, then it's probably time for you to be told that you need to get over you. If you believe that something is beneath you, it's probably time for you to get over you. Do not waste opportunities. If you have an opportunity to sit with 2 people, you take it. You have an opportunity with 5 people, you take it. 10 people, you take it. But you remain humble, and you take any opportunity you get to grow. The third thing you can do in this season of preparation is be confident in how God made you. Be confident in how God made you, which means you need to explore how God has actually wired you. You know, there's something really good about learning from other people, but there's something really bad about trying to be other people. Learn from people, but don't try and be those people. Let me just speak really specifically to people who want to go into ministry, because I believe we have a lot of those here. If you are a worship leader, let me just tell you, this world does not need another Jeff Johnson or Jack Thweet or Jimmy McNeil or Phil Wickham. This world needs you to be you. If you want to be a communicator of God's word, this world does not need another Matt Chandler or Ben Stewart or Judah Smith or Christine Kane. This world needs you to be you. Be confident in how God made you. People can spot an imitator from a mile away. Just know you will always be a better original than a copy. The third key ingredient, active in David's life, that I hope is active in yours, is excellence. Let me just show you this kind of hilarious, slightly weird story in David's life. Look at 1 Samuel 18, verses 20 through 27. Here's what happens. It says, "Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, 'Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him.'" This is one of the ways that Saul tried to kill David, by getting him to marry his daughter. He said, "Therefore," that's kind of weird. Anyway, "Therefore, Saul said to David a second time, 'You shall now be my son-in-law.' And Saul commanded his servants, 'Speak to David in private and say, Behold, the king has delighted in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law.' And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David. And David said, 'Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I'm a poor man and have no reputation?' And the servants of Saul told him thus, and so did David speak. Then Saul said, 'Thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies.' Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for his wife." This is so weird. Like, men, when you go to ask your future father-in-law for his daughter's hand in marriage, you will never have it as bad as David had it. I wish I had a daughter so I could try this. Like, that's great. Go bring me the 100 foreskins. Go circumcise 100 people who don't want to be circumcised, and we got a deal. Okay, great. How weird would that be? That's what happens here. What was that conversation like with David's men? Like, okay, guys, here's our mission. I mean, what was that like, guys? We're going to pursue him. We're going to overtake him. We're going to circumcise him. Any questions? Yeah. Why? So dumb. This is so weird. Now, you know what I love about this? Saul asks for 100, and what does David do? He brings him 200. You know what that shows me? It shows a commitment to excellence. And it didn't start here. I believe that David was excellent in the field, shepherding sheep. He was excellent when he went to war with the Philistine. He was excellent when he was pursuing his Saul's daughter. There was a commitment to excellence. I am so grateful that at different points in my life, I've had older influences who have instilled in me just a commitment to excellence. I will never forget this, and this is such a small thing, but I will never forget one summer when I was in college. I went home to intern with the high school group at my church in Dallas, and the youth pastor, he pulled out a piece of paper like this, and this is so small, but he took it and he folded it in half, and he folded it like this. And I don't know if you can see, but you can see that the edges don't match up. He folded it like that, and he said, "Do we ever send something like this out?" And I was like, I guess. He's like, "We never send anything like this out. Because this is in some way a reflection of Jesus Christ." And that has stuck with me ever since. And I recall that to mind often anytime I'm doing something. I remember the summer after I graduated from A&M, I went to work at Crooked Creek, which is a Young Life camp in Colorado. And I will never forget what they told us. They called us to a level of excellence that I'd never experienced in my life. They said, "You know what? When you're cleaning toilets, you clean it as if Jesus will be the next person to sit on it. And when you wash dishes, you wash those plates as if Jesus will be the next person to eat off of them. And you rake gravel as if Jesus will be the next person to walk on them." And that has stuck with me all these years. Why? Because it lifts up Colossians 3:23. What does it say? It says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." What would it look like for you to cultivate excellence in the small things now so you won't end up cutting corners on the big things in the future? Some of y'all aren't going to like hearing this, but what would it look like for you to write a paper as if Jesus will be the one reading it? What would it look like for you to contribute to a group project as if Jesus is in your group? When you're at an internship this summer, when you go to get coffee for your boss, what would it look like for you to get coffee as if Jesus is the one going to be drinking it? Excellence. You want to do something big, commit from now to excellence. The last key ingredient that was active in David's life was faithfulness. It was faithfulness. David's story is that he was anointed as king somewhere between the age of 10 and 15. David didn't actually become king until he was 30. So for about 15 years, you know what he did? He shepherded sheep. He played an instrument for the acting king. And he hid in caves because the acting king was trying to take David out. He was faithful through all of it. In the good times and the bad times, he was faithful through all of it. You want to do something big, then at this young age now, you have to learn what it looks like to be a faithful man or a woman. I will never forget when I was in high school, I had this weird thing about me. When I was in high school, I would go and I had kind of two groups of friends. And I would go and I would start hanging out with this one group of friends, and I wouldn't like what they were doing, and so I would just get up and leave. Like, I wouldn't even tell them I was leaving. I would just get up and bail. And I did that so often that they developed a phrase for it, and they just referred to it as pulling a TA. So anytime someone would bail on something, they would refer to it as pulling a TA. Why? Because I had an issue with faithfulness. I was more acquainted with being flaky than being faithful. And the reason I tell you that is that many of you have grown accustomed to pulling a TA. Pulling a TA has become socially acceptable on this college campus. And this is one of my passion points with college students. It drives me crazy to see how socially okay it is to be flaky. to not be where you say you're going to be, to not do what you say you're going to do, to bail on student organizations halfway through the semester. Let me just say this. If you're a high capacity person, if you're overly ambitious, if you're one of those people who always loves to be so busy, and you commit to being a part of 5 student organizations, that's awesome, but you better see those organizations all the way through to May. Because when you gave your word and you committed to being a part of it, you know what? You made a commitment. Please don't ever bring God into it and say, you know what, I just feel like God wants me to pull out of this thing halfway through. Because I don't think he wants you to. God values faithfulness. Be faithful in the small things now so that you won't be flaky in the big things in the future. The Bible already tells us what God truly celebrates. When you cross the finish line of your life, the scripture is clear. The words that you want to hear are, well done, good and faithful servant. The Bible doesn't offer hope of you reaching heaven and God looking at you saying, well done, good and high capacity servant. Well done, good and 4.0 servant. Well done, good and beautiful servant. Well done, good and incredible partier servant. No. We know what God celebrates. He celebrates faithfulness. So I beg you to learn the difference between being faithful and flaky, even now. Be a man or a woman of your word now. Value small over big at this point in your life. Value small over big. You want to do something big ultimately, then let these ingredients be evident in your life. Number 1, surrender. Small daily yeses will help you when it comes to the big trajectory shaping yeses. Preparation. Don't despise the field, because the field is what will prepare you for a faithful future. Excellence. Be excellent in the small things now so that you won't cut corners in the big things later. Faithfulness. Be faithful in the small things now so that you won't flake out on the big things later. You know, it's interesting. When it came to baking bread, you know what we love? We love the results. We love the results. We love getting the loaf, being able to cut into this thing, butter it up, and eat it. We love the results. Like today, I had my assistant bake this loaf. And so I showed up to the office, and this thing was just sitting on the table. And so I immediately picked it up, and I started smelling this thing, and I was like, is there any way for me to cut into it without the crowd seeing that I've cut into it? No, I better not. I'll just eat it after breakaway. I'll just take this puppy down. That's fine. But we love the results. But the reality is that this thing took time and work. I mean, here's all the ingredients that she had to work with. I mean, this was a process of her mixing and pouring, and then she had to work this thing and wait for hours for this thing to rise. There was a process to it. See, we love the product, we love the result, but you know what God values? God values the process. He values the process because along the way, when we commit to the process, we begin to look more and more like his son, Jesus Christ. See, Jesus Christ was surrendered. Isaiah tells us it was God's will to crush his son. That means before Jesus Christ ever left heaven to come to earth, he surrendered to the will of the Father. The reason that he even showed up in a manger is because in heaven, God said, I'm going to crush you, and he said, your will be done. Jesus was prepared. He was prepared. He came to earth and he took on flesh. He became one of us. He went to the cross as fully God and fully man so that he could be a suitable substitute for each one of us. Jesus Christ was excellent. He lived the life that we couldn't. He lived the life that God deserved. He lived a perfect life, and he was faithful. He stepped out of heaven and into earth, deserving to be worshiped as a king, and instead he was crucified on a cross. He was beaten, whipped, laughed at, mocked, scorned, despised, rejected. And he was faithful to the end, in which he declared, "It is finished." Jesus did something big. Jesus has given us the greatest display of love history has ever seen. But not just that, he's given us the greatest display of victory that history has ever seen. It's the greatest display of love that the God of the universe doesn't need us, but he wants us. Not one of us is deserving of a relationship with God. Each one of us has offended God. Each one of us has disobeyed God. Each one of us has done what God does not want us to do. Each one of us has fallen short of God's standard. And because we fall short of the standard of a holy God, we have to be careful not to debate things in our mind according to our standards of what's fair or good. No, we have to work up to God's standard and what's fair in his mind. Imperfection, even a drop of imperfection before a holy God, demands justice, which leads to his judgment. We don't deserve his blessing, we deserve his judgment. But Jesus Christ has come and he stepped in our way. He stepped in our place. The wrath of God that we deserved was unleashed, poured out upon his Son, Jesus Christ. He was punished so that we wouldn't have to be. Tell me a greater love in this world than that. Jesus did something big, but not just that. He's given us the greatest display of victory history will ever see, because he didn't just die. When he died, he was put in a tomb, and on the third day, he walked out of that tomb. And when he walked out of that tomb, it was a demonstration and a declaration that Satan, sin, and death had been conquered. And so for all of those who put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, for all those who will give their life to Jesus Christ, the power of sin is broken in our lives. Freedom is possible. Every day, Jesus can now lead you in a way where freedom from certain sin in your life can be more and more of a reality until you die to go and be with him. But not just that. Because of Christ's victory, we have hope that this is the closest we will ever get to hell. And when we die, we will experience a monumental trade up. You know what the greatest news is? The greatest news is that the author of love and the King of victory is now committed to living inside of each one of us through the presence of his Holy Spirit. And he wants to do something big through each one of us. But you know where it starts? It starts all the way back at the beginning. It starts with surrender.